When she was losing consciousness, they would bring water, revive her, bring her back to a semi-conscious state, and then again. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. And we were thinking about episodes that would somehow relate to vacations also in a way like this. As a warning, be careful because vacations have this thing about them that gives you a sense of security no matter where you are or what you're doing. Usually it's this kind of carefree feeling, and of course that's normal and understandable, but sometimes, unfortunately, there are tragic situations that end up affecting your whole life. That's how it is in this story, as you can probably guess. It was summer vacation, the summer of 2017. There are probably favorite resorts in Turkey, Egypt, and Italy. If it's Italy, then of course Rimini. Everyone has probably heard of or been to Rimini. Millions of tourists fly or travel there every year, hundreds of thousands from Poland. Well, it's kind of a cradle of tourists, I would say, also from Poland and Italy, and that's no surprise. On the Adriatic, beautiful sea, plus such history, and Fellini was born there. Other attractions, so it really is a fairy tale atmosphere. Besides, the resort itself, as far as I remember, is almost 200 years old, which is rare, and this is the story of a couple from Poland who went on vacation to Italy, to Rimini. Basically, their vacation was already coming to an end, because it was the end of August 2017 and it was exactly their last evening. On that last evening, they decided to go to the beach, probably also because many people have a habit of doing that at the end. A picture with their eyes and then you take it home with you. That was probably the case with them. They went out. So around 3 a.m. they left their room and went to the beach. They were there around 4. They just sat down, smoked cigarettes and drank beer, but it was non-alcoholic. I think they were also waiting for the sunrise. There were still 2 hours left, but probably they were waiting for the sunrise, just waiting for that moment so they could take those last memories home with them. Unfortunately, they took home sad, tragic and traumatic memories, and that's why we're talking about and remembering this story. The 4 boys were a kind of clique. I would say they were already an advanced gang because after all they had committed various crimes. 4 buddies, friends from this North African clique, 2 from Morocco, brothers aged 15 and 16, 1 from Nigeria, a 17-year-old, and the oldest of them, Butungu Lei. That's his name, 20 years old, he came from Congo, all of them. At some point they showed up in Italy, or actually in the case of those 3, their parents showed up in Italy. All 3 of them were sons of people working there who came for work, so-called guest workers as they're called, who found jobs there. They all also knew each other from the city of Pesaro. Well, Pesaro is known in Italy for having plenty of work. At least during that time there was a lot of work there. There's the port, the shipyard, chemical plants, textile factories. They produce scooters, so that's why a lot of people simply look for work there and find it. The oldest one from Congo, Butungu, well, he came to Italy on one of those rubber boats. You probably often see them in movies or news reports, how people arrive in Italy on those kinds of boats. He also came that way with his parents and had refugee status in Italy. He ended up in a camp, and I would even say the Italians gave him a chance because he finished vocational school there in that camp. But Butungu didn't really intend to work. He didn't really want to do it. From the beginning, he seemed to be shaping himself into someone who would commit crimes, and that's exactly what happened in Pesaro. They met there, although in fact they lived in a small town near Pesaro. But it was boring there. They had nothing to do, so they were very often in Rimini, coming to Rimini from there. By the way, There are 40 trains a day from that small town to Rimini, so you can see that you can just go there anytime. And it also seems, when I looked at those materials, that Butungu was simply a drug dealer. And it seems that the beach in Rimini was simply a place where he sold drugs, so they were often on that beach. They knew each other. The police in Pesaro also knew them. They said they break in, they steal bikes. But it also seems that in Italy there is a bit of tolerance for this kind of juvenile crime, because people assume that maybe they'll grow up, maybe they'll change and become better. But in this case, that hope was rather misplaced. In any case, those four from North Africa, because that's where their roots were often on that beach. Each of them basically had something on their conscience since childhood. Those two from Morocco, the brothers, they already made trouble in middle school. In fact, the older one, the 16-year-old, was expelled from that school because of his bad behavior. Also, I would say it runs in the family. Their father was an unemployed welder. He also committed minor crimes. He had a case for drug dealing, for drunk driving. So if you look at them and their family, they really didn't stand a chance. Besides, it seemed that way because that's what the police, the guardians, and the teachers said, that they were basically raised by the streets, that there was no care from their father or mother. So in this way, they probably never had a chance to be normal in any of this. Besides, that 15-year-old, the younger of the Moroccans, actually scared some of his classmates because he was always talking about murders, talking about rapes, saying that he gets women drunk and rapes them. Well, for a 15-year-old, some people said he has psychopathic tendencies. They were simply afraid of him. It doesn't seem like he was telling the truth. They also took a lot of pictures, especially that Butungu guy. He took pictures of himself in front of expensive cars. When their friends looked at them, they saw that they wore branded clothes. As they joked, well, Caritas doesn't give out clothes like that. So it was immediately obvious from that they must be living off something, that they have some extra income. Because they didn't work, they were nicely dressed and basically led a carefree life. And everyone around just saw it. And it's around 3 in the morning, August 26, 2017. A 26-year-old Polish woman and her partner are leaving the hotel. They go to the beach and lay out their towels. As I said earlier, they smoke cigarettes and drink non-alcoholic beer. They sit and talk. And at some point they see that a man is coming, especially alone, so there wasn't really any danger here. That was the 20-year-old Butungu. He approached them speaking broken English. He asked them what they were doing here, where they were from. They said they were from Poland. But after a while he became aggressive. He demanded that they give him their wallets and cell phones. And then the Poles realized that it was simply a robbery. From a logical point of view, it was a planned robbery. This Butungu simply came as bait. He was alone, so he didn't cause any fear in the two Poles. But the other three stayed behind. They were simply lurking nearby. When he was already with them and started talking, they jumped out. And those three caught up too. They immediately started beating the man brutally. They started beating the woman. The man was hit on the head several times with a bottle. Those were hard blows. He was dazed. They also cut his face with glass, with that bottle that broke. It was the same with the woman. She was beaten, kicked. They threw her onto the sand, and then they tied her hands and started raping her. Of course, I won't go into the details of all this here. It was a nightmare for the woman, a tragedy, a horror. I would say it was an incredibly traumatic experience because it looked like something out of a movie. where several men, exactly three, are holding a woman. They're holding her by the legs, and the fourth one rapes her. Then they switch. When she was losing consciousness, they would bring water. They revived her. They would bring her to a state of semi-consciousness, and then they raped her again. All of this went on for quite a while. Her partner couldn't do anything. He himself was hit hard. He was dazed, also half conscious. And at the end, when all of this had already happened, they ran away. They also took their cell phones. They took their money wallets, because I think they had everything in their wallets, and they ran away. And once a Polish woman and a Polish man were sitting on that sand. They couldn't pull themselves together. Each of them got a lot of blows. They couldn't move. They couldn't get up. They were waiting for any kind of help. Of course, they were expecting any kind of help, but that help, I would say, came from probably the least expected source. At that time, a local prostitute was simply walking along the beach. I also think that she was somehow used to all kinds of situations. Maybe she herself had experienced similar things before. She didn't run away. She didn't leave. As she later testified herself, she said she thought the Poles were simply drunk. So she hesitated to approach, but then she realized that they weren't drunk at all. They were simply beaten. She saw that they were covered in blood. On top of that, the woman was wrapped in the man's clothing, because he simply took off his clothes and gave them to her. And he was just sitting there in his shorts. She approached and helped them. Then she notified the police, and that was a quick reaction. She notified the police, helped them get up, somehow get out of there, and make it to the hotel. Well, of course, an investigation began. I would say that because of the place, Rimini. Well, it's a place where people come. Hundreds of thousands, millions of tourists. The police really got to work right away, because places like Rimini rely on tourism. The case became very high profile. Practically all the world's media wrote about it. People wondered about the brutality of these people. Well, it was known that they were young people, that they were probably newcomers from outside Italy, that they weren't Italians, so they strongly denied it. All of this was talked about, written about, shown, even various statements from politicians. All of this made the issue very loud, and everyone, almost the whole world, heard about it. The police quickly got on their trail. Of course, that's how it is in this kind of town. There are cameras everywhere. They themselves were, I would say, yes, well, they did something terrible. They were a bit like wild beasts, because on their way while escaping, they also raped a Peruvian transsexual woman. So it's also amazing they were in some kind of frenzy. I also think that if this Butungu was dealing drugs, it's not out of the question that they were simply under the influence of drugs. Those cameras recorded them. They practically showed the entire route of their escape. Then as they get on the train, then as they get off it, and since they were known to the local police, there was no problem at all with identifying them. The police recognized them and knew their origins and address. There was a bit of a problem with actually detaining them, because they started hiding. That's why their photos were shown on television, in the media in general, also on the internet. I think it's because those two brothers from Morocco, they feared vigilante justice since their faces were shown, which especially outraged people. They came to the police station on September 2nd, and they told everything. And not only about what happened, but they also said who they were with. That's when he was also arrested in Rimini, that 17-year-old boy from Nigeria. There was a problem with arresting that 20-year-old Butungu from Congo, and he realized that he had something to fight for. He was the oldest, so he was aware of what he had done. He was probably also aware when he saw himself on television that the police were on his trail. He boarded a train to Milan on September 2nd. He was probably trying to make his way to Milan and then maybe even get out of Italy altogether. Fittingly, policewomen tracked him down on that train to Milan. They were working undercover there, and he was caught by them. For him, it's probably a bit of an extra punishment too, that he was caught by two policewomen actually very quickly, literally within a week. If you count from the 26th to the 3rd of September, within a week, all four of them were behind bars. Of course, their trial began. It was closely watched by practically all the media. Everyone was wondering what kind of sentence they would get, especially for the leader of this group, this gang. This 20-year-old Butungu was convicted. Skonga, but the defense also did what they could to make him look a little better, so that he wouldn't be considered the leader. And they tried to make him look a bit like a victim. In the end, everyone was charged. The charges were about repeatedly raping a Polish woman, about the brutal, severe beating of a Polish man, and on top of that, the rape of that Peruvian transgender woman. As it turned out, at the same time, they also committed a robbery on an Italian-Ethiopian couple. So they committed quite a few crimes back then. It looks like they were committing these crimes almost every day. Maybe they weren't that brutal. Because of that, they simply got away with everything. The case with that Butungu was also astonishing, because as I told you, his defenders did everything they could to clear his name a bit. They even brought the case at some point to the Supreme Court so that he would get a lower sentence. When the case started in the Supreme Court, it turned out that no one showed up for the hearing, not even his defenders. The court said that it seems even his defenders didn't believe that he would simply change. Because of that, the sentence he received was upheld, and the sentence for him was 16 years in prison. The other three got theirs. In this situation, the sentences are severe, almost 10 years in prison. Exactly 9 years and 8 months. I'm saying they're severe, at least by Italian standards. Because usually in these kinds of situations, the sentences are about 5 years in prison. It seems that this tolerance or acceptance is quite high, and these sentences usually are lower. But also, as I said before, presumably it's because of Rimini that the whole world was watching what's happening in Italy, the sentences to be issued and the resulting punishment, as I mentioned, by Italian standards. It seems high. Also, the consequences of all this, what happened in some way, the families of those two boys from Morocco suffered. Those brothers, they were simply expelled, thrown out of Italy, the whole family. But also, when they started to check, it was a family that is described as dysfunctional, simply a family where those two boys, they grew up on the street. The mother of those boys was very aggressive. The father, on the other hand, he used to drink. He had committed crimes. It also turned out that besides those two brothers, they have younger children as well. And those younger children, they were simply on the street where they were begging. It seemed that simply dad and mom made themselves a source of income like that, because the children who were begging on the street were supporting them. So everyone was thrown out, removed from Italy, and they had to go back to Morocco watching. Or are we talking about this story not because these people were from Africa? Danger, it can come from anywhere. Bandits, criminals, it could be anyone. I would say from any nation. We are saying this just because to warn, to make people aware. So we're talking about this as a warning. Be careful. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, I would say as usual, so check out our channel, watch us, and of course, as usual,
take care.